So we've talked a little bit about the fundamentals of what's within the zero trust model and start approach. I think for me, some of the stuff that's really come out lately that's quite interesting. It's starting to look at the concept of data sovereignty, but also data privacy. So obviously we've talked about the identities of individuals, we've talked about their devices, but then we started to start talking about their location. And interesting for things like GDPR, location is a protected characteristic in a special category data processing. And yet we've now got logs that are actually riddled with who somebody is, where they were accessing something from, what they were interested in, and where they were doing it. Which is really interesting from the point of view of going, obviously within these security controls, we're actually starting to build up sensitive information in its own accord, unrelated to the applications they're accessing. So in terms of sovereignty and privacy, what are your primary concerns? What are you seeing, James, from people in the marketplace about? Like, where is their interest lying? Like, what are their concerns around that? How is that to approach tackling?
Well, I guess when we think about data sovereignty, we really think about the rules that apply around data that is collected in a particular nation state, and it really is varying from geography to geography. So we do quite a lot of work out in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, and data sovereignty has quite a different inclination there to that which it has across Europe and the UK. But in terms of the controls that zero trust allows you to get, putting aside for one moment the data that's been collected whilst you're implementing zero trust, because that's a good point, and I hadn't really thought of that before. Theoretically, done well, zero trust should enable a lot of those controls to be more accurately targeted to the user that is accessing that data. Personal data protection, ensuring that only the right people are getting to the right data is really, in essence, what we're trying to do with zero trust. Now, there are some practicality issues to that. One is you need a single authoritative source of identity, and if you're thinking about the wider public and perhaps getting access to your health records or perhaps information that's being held by the Met on if you've been a victim of crime or something, how do you prove that identity? I remember the hoops and the issues that were thrown up during the 2006 ID card Act.
I was just saying, all we need is a national identity.
Well, exactly. So to some degree, these issues are going to raise their head again. We have sourced, and who owns that identity? Who is the authority source of that identity? Is it Google? Is it Microsoft? Is it Netflix? Is it the government? Who is taking responsibility for being that root authority for identity? So they are challenges. Day to day, we don't sort of concern ourselves at Appgate too much with consumer-facing stuff. So it's not a practical issue for us so much because we're dealing more at the corporate level and corporate identity. But if we are to extrapolate out the journey of zero trust, and I think we're going to talk about third parties and supply chain and those sort of things a little later on, and you start thinking about who are the end consumers of this data, then at some point that will have to be addressed. Now, obviously, we've got our government gateway IDs and those sort of things, so we've sort of walked a little bit into that process under the radar. So perhaps it will be less of an issue this time around than it was.
It is, of course, beneficial to tax years ago. The tax on this now all was yes, which is lovely. So, Johnny, certainly in your environment, obviously, data privacy, data sovereignty, absolutely essential, and you have well-established and mature processes around that kind of thing. So how do you find that in terms of the change in your security controls and the data you're collecting from that zero trust perspective?
So for us, obviously, what I've said previously before, we know who you are, what device you're coming in from, etc. And and we collect data, we're the masters of collecting data, I suppose, and we are governed by very mature processes and people like the ICO. It's always interested in what they're collecting. So for us, I think a lot of it, we were thinking about this quite a lot recently, probably in the last 6-7 months, because we've been doing a lot on identity. So, actually, the bit around, well, you know, I could get somebody from 923 using their identity to go and access my services. Right, I've collected their information as part of an access routine. I haven't collected their data for a policing purpose. So we have to be pretty careful about actually, if we're bringing things that aren't part of our domain, is how we control that data. And, you know, you made a really good point about, you know, I'm collecting logs that I'm going to push into my really expensive seed, or do I really need that data? Because I've proven who you are when you've kind of come in to use that service. So I think the zero trust piece actually opens up a bit of a problem for us, to be honest. You know, and for us, we really need to think about actually, you know, we're consuming more data, which isn't really necessary. I think that's the kind of the bit we really need to think about.
Yeah, I think it's that really interesting point around kind of your known unknowns and unknown unknowns. If we're a bit Rumsfeldian about it, but going actually, I think the inclination is always to collect more data because you don't necessarily start out by knowing what you're looking for, and therefore you don't know where the things that you're going to be scared of will manifest themselves. But obviously, as you start to aggregate and collect more and more of the data points, you're giving yourselves a bigger data management on your head, and also if you start to collect sensitive information that maybe you have less of a tangible business purpose for processing. So if somebody like the ICO comes on and says, why do you have all of that information? You go, well, you know, just in case bad things happen. Which I don't think normally works in defence. But first off,